A classroom turns deadly when a lesson ends in blood. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axen. This community is incredible. Share in the comments where you're listening from. Your voices make this journey special, and I can't wait to read them. Now, into the mystery. Flaxborough was the sort of market town that liked to think history had decided to stop there for a rest, admire the mellow brickwork, and then forgotten to call in the modern age to fetch it. It sat in its own slow weather. The buses came when they were ready. The river did not so much flow as contemplate an eventual destination. And the people, who were neither kinder nor crueler than any others, practiced the local art of appearing unsurprised by everything. On the first Saturday in September, the Flaxborough Horticultural and Homecraft Show opened in the assembly rooms behind St. Barnabas Church, an annual occasion in which the town exercised its peculiar competitive instincts under the cover of chrysanthemums and jam. The show's committee called it a celebration of rural endeavor. The vicar called it a wholesome reminder of stewardship. Mrs. Daisy Hetherington, who had chaired it for 8 straight years, called it the only day I get to see whether anyone has been cheating. By 10 o'clock, the hall had already taken on the gentle fug of overwatered flowers, floor polish, damp paper napkins, and human triumph. Tables lined both sides of the room, each with its own white cloth hiding wobbly legs, and each loaded with the sort of earnest handiwork that persuades you to admire it for the effort, even when prudence prevents closer inspection. Tall sunflowers nodded over the vegetable section. Bottles of pickled onions glowed with stern domesticity beside neat pyramids of rock cakes. A faintly militant row of knitted baby cardigans in pale colors claimed a corner too close to the door. The dahlia display sat at the far end, in pride of place under the high windows. It was the jewel of the show, and everyone knew it, which meant everyone had opinions about it. Some people believed dahlias were vulgar by nature and had to be subdued into respectability by correct pruning. Others believed they were the only honest flowers, because they did not pretend to modesty. Both factions were represented in Flaxborough, though, mercifully, not in the council. Mr. Albert Croft stood over the dahlias as if guarding a national treasure. He was a narrow, mustached man in his 60s who had retired from the railway 20 years earlier and never forgiven the railways for doing so. In retirement, he had found 2 pursuits large enough to contain his sense of order: the Flaxborough allotments and the show. The allotments had rules he could enforce. The show had judges he could charm. He had succeeded at both with such consistency that winning had started to look less like a hobby and more like a natural law. His dahlias this year were a sort of red that warned of moral consequences. They sat in perfect symmetry, each bloom cupped, each petal precisely unblemished, each stem cut to a length that implied a measuring tape had been involved. The label in front of them, typed, not handwritten, read D3. Dahlias, 3 blooms. Bishop's Surprise. A. Croft. Mr. Croft had already won a silver cup for Marrows 2 years earlier, and a commendation for chutney the year before that, which he insisted had been robbed of first place by a judge with no palate. If he won the dahlias too, he would have to accept the possibility of being unbearable as a formal title, though no one in Flaxborough would have said as much out loud. He was joined by Mrs. Hetherington herself, a plump, brisk woman who could commit an act of kindness in the same tone she used for ordering coal. She wore a navy cardigan with the show's badge on the lapel and carried, as ever, a clipboard. People approached her when they wanted information and avoided her when they had done something that might cause her to seek it. "Albert," she said, looking fondly severe at the dahlias, "you've been up at dawn fussing again." I was not fussing. His voice held the affront of a man accused of ornamentation. I was ensuring correct hydration. She gave him the sort of acknowledgement that meant, "You are impossible, but I have known you too long to be surprised." "Well, they're splendid, I'll say that. Just don't go hovering when the judges arrive, or Mrs. Vine will start coughing theatrically." "Mrs. Vine coughs theatrically at everything," he said. "She's got a chest full of indignation. Anyhow, I don't hover, I observe." Mrs. Hetherington was about to reply when a clatter from the entrance made several heads turn at once. It was, on the face of it, a minor disturbance. People clattered in halls all the time. But in Flaxborough, where small noises were often regarded as messages, it had a different quality. A young man pushed through the door carrying 2 wooden crates. He was flushed, with hair that had been combed in haste, and now regretted it. The crates were marked "Fragile" in thick black letters that seemed to accuse the town of intent. He deposited them on the nearest table and wiped his forehead with a handkerchief that had already given up. "Morning," he panted too loudly. "Morning, Gordon," Mrs. Hetherington called. Gordon Ricks was the assistant at Green and Spindle's Garden Supplies, a shop on Sheep Market Lane where people bought compost in spring and moral advice all year. Gordon was useful because he was young enough to do deliveries and old enough to know who was related to whom. He was also, in private, a keen amateur of rumors. This made him, in Flaxborough terms, practically public infrastructure. "You're late," Mrs. Hetherington said, not unkindly. "We were wondering if you'd got lost among your own geraniums." Gordon gave a laugh that sought permission to be nervous. "Sorry, Mr. Spindle needed me to fetch a couple of things last minute for Mrs. Swain. She's entered the floral arrangement, and she was in a right state." There was a soft ripple of interest at that name, like someone plucking a wire and letting it hum. Mrs. Agnes Swain was a local educator of consciences, head mistress at St. Crispin's Girls' School, and therefore both admired and resented by equal measure. She was not a natural horticulturalist, but she treated the show as a pedagogical challenge. When she entered, it was assumed she would take winning as a moral imperative. The last time she had competed, her display had been called bold by the judge and terrifying by everyone else. "A right state about what?" asked Mrs. Hetherington, half from duty, half from curiosity. Gordon hesitated, enjoying the moment just enough to disguise it as reluctance. "Oh, her lilies. She said something about one missing. She was sure she'd cut 3 and now it's only 2. Mr. Croft sniffed. "You can't mislay a lily, not if you're competent." Mrs. Hetherington shot him a glance that said, "Remember charity, Albert." Out loud she said, "Perhaps she cut 2, she's busy." She said she cut 3. Gordon glanced down the hall with a conspiratorial air. "She reckons someone's had it away." Not that she said, "had it away." She said, "removed without permission." It was the kind of detail that could lead to anything or nothing. In Flaxborough, it would lead to conversation either way. "Who would take a lily?" Mrs. Hetherington said. Gordon shrugged. "Maybe it fell off in transport." "Or perhaps," Albert Croft said in his driest tone, "Mrs. Swain is so used to pupil mischief she imagines it everywhere." Gordon gave another of his permission-seeking laughs. "Maybe." "Anyway," Mrs. Hetherington said firmly, "let's not start a drama before the tea's even brewed. We'll have a look at her entry when she comes." She turned back to her clipboard and marched away to settle an argument about whether Mr. Pettigrew's marrow counted as long vegetable or merely misunderstood fruit. Gordon moved off to unpack his crates, and Mr. Croft resumed his watch. But the hall had taken note. Miss Prue Baxter, the librarian, leaned slightly toward Mrs. Mildred Bell, who ran the post office. "Did you hear that?" Miss Baxter murmured. "About Agnes Swain's lily?" Mrs. Bell replied softly. "I heard. It'll be her own fault. She never ties things down properly, too used to telling other people what to do." "And yet," Miss Baxter said, with the delicately spiteful impartiality of a woman who shelved both romance novels and true crime, "it's not like her to be careless." "No," Mrs. Bell agreed after a pause. "She's not careless. That's what makes it interesting." Across the room, Counselor, Cyril Brand, who had arrived in a striped blazer that attempted informality and achieved only loudness, was conducting a speech at 2 trapped listeners. "Wonderful turnout," he was saying. "Wonderful to see civic spirit alive. I always say these things bind a community. You take a lily missing, if indeed it is missing, and already people are talking about vigilance. It's healthy." His listeners nodded in the manner of people who knew that in Flaxborough, excessive agreement could be mistaken for ambition. Near the tea urns, young Mrs. Lorna Hakes, who had entered a Victoria sponge and hoped no one would notice the slight collapse at the centre, whispered to her friend, "If a lily's gone, God knows what else might be. My sponge was under a tea towel for a minute. Anyone could have done anything." Her friend said, "No one's going to steal a sponge, Lorna." "Well," Lorna said, wounded, "you wouldn't. But you don't know what people are like." And that was the essential Flaxborough philosophy in miniature. By 11, the judges would arrive wearing expressions of benevolent rigor. By noon, there would be ribbons and faint disappointments. By 3, the town would have worked itself comfortable with one narrative or another. But for now, in the sweet, damp air of the assembly rooms, a small absence hung larger than it had any right to. It was at precisely 10:15 that Agnes Swain walked in. She did not enter so much as take the room under consideration. Tall, angular, and tidy in a grey suit, better suited to a staff meeting than a flower show, she carried her arrangement box as if it were a lesson plan. Her mouth was set in a line that had ushered hundreds of girls into adulthood and frightened a fair number of parents on the way. With her came a faint chill, not because she was unkind. She was, in her own way, extremely kind, but because nothing about her suggested she would tolerate slackness in the universe. She crossed to the floral section, placed her box on the table, and began removing damp newspaper with quick, practiced hands. Mrs. Hetherington approached, smile in place. "Agnes, good to see you. I hope the traffic wasn't too dreadful." "It was not the traffic," Agnes said without looking up. "It is missing." Mrs. Hetherington blinked her social blink. "The lily." Agnes turned then, and her eyes were steady enough to make the dahlias look nervous. "Yes, the lily. One white oriental, cut at 7:40 this morning, placed in this box. I checked before I left. It was there." "And now it isn't?" Mrs. Hetherington said gently. "No." Agnes gave a small, precise shake of her head. "And I do not miscount lilies." There was a silence of about 3 seconds, which in a room full of Flaxborough people was ample time for half a dozen possible motives to begin walking about. Mrs. Hetherington said, "Well, let's not jump to conclusions. Perhaps it slipped under the paper." "It would have to have slipped through space," Agnes said. "There is no lily." She turned back to her box, rearranging what remained with a kind of brisk dignity, as though refusing to be defeated by either botany or human nature. Around them, the hum of the hall went on, but it had acquired a slightly sharper edge, like a radio tuned a little closer to the station. At the far end of the room, unnoticed by most, Mr. Albert Croft watched the scene with mild professional curiosity. He was not an unkind man. He simply believed the world worked best when people counted properly. Still, something about Agnes Swain's certainty did not fit the usual shape of prejudging nerves. She did not look flustered. She looked offended. He adjusted the label in front of his dahlias by a fraction of an inch and thought, without insisting on it, that missing lilies were not the normal business of a flower show. But then Flaxborough was not, strictly speaking, normal business either. Mrs. Hetherington, who had handled lost raffle tickets, missing poodles, and once a small embezzlement with much the same expression, leaned in to peer into Agnes Swain's box. Not because she doubted Agnes, one rarely did, but because looking was a kind of civic ritual. "There's no chance it's dropped on the floor?" she said, lowering her voice, for the floor was crowded with legs and canvas bags and the accidental intimacy of market-town footwear. Agnes's mouth tightened. If it had dropped on the floor, Mrs. Hetherington, someone would have seen it. A lily does not vanish modestly. It's large and white and opinionated. That's true enough. Mrs. Hetherington gave the box a dutiful glance. We'll keep an eye out. Gordon's already mentioned it, so people will be tripping over lilies before lunch. If it turns up, it turns up. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't. You'll still give them a run for their money with 2. It isn't the money. It's the principle. Principle in Flaxborough was a substance like treacle, visible in theory, sticky in practice, and apt to turn up in unexpected places. Mrs. Hetherington patted Agnes's sleeve in a gesture that might have been comfort if Agnes had been the kind to accept it, then moved away to settle a quarrel about marrows. Agnes tried to behave as though a missing lily were merely an inconvenience. She set the remaining blooms in a crescent, adjusted fern fronds, and inserted a drift of blue cornflowers to cover the gap. Her hands were steady, yet in her mind a tidy list of possibilities formed itself, as lists did when she had a misbehaving class. Carelessness, malice, absurdity. She rejected the first, would not admit the second without evidence, and found the third intolerable. Across the room, rumors were already breeding. Mrs. Bell of the post office began a second telling in which the lily was not only missing, but snatched. Miss Baxter suggested that perhaps someone had moved it helpfully. Councillor Brand announced to newcomers that there's a bit of horticultural intrigue afoot. Teenagers from St. Crispin's, drafted in for tea duty, exchanged bright looks that said any misfortune at a flower show had, by definition, to be someone's fault. Mr. Croft's interest sharpened when, making his morning circuit under the guise of checking vegetables, he passed the floral tables and saw Agnes's arrangement. She had made the best of it, but the absence was plain to an eye trained on symmetry. He paused. "A pity about the lily," he said in the neutral tone of a man remarking on weather. Agnes looked up. "You've heard. This is Flaxborough. We hear things before they happen. Then you may have heard where it went." "If I had," he said, "I'd have returned it. I don't approve of interference." "How convenient." The words were cool and not quite fair, but she could not retract them without seeming to apologize. Mr. Croft studied her. "I was at my allotment at 7:40, he said, "alone. If I'd taken your lily, I'd have had to carry it down Bunting Street in full view, and I don't parade stolen goods before breakfast." Agnes heard the logic and felt an unwanted flicker of regret. "Very well, it wasn't aimed at you personally." "No," he agreed dryly. "It was aimed at the world." He moved on, leaving behind the suggestion that the matter was not as trivial as everyone wished. Agnes watched him go, annoyed by the way he was right, even when he was pompous. At 10:40, the judges arrived with clipboards and an air of gentle omnipotence. Mr. Havelock, retired nurseryman, Mrs. Vine, widow and cough enthusiast, and young Mr. Selby, who looked as though he believed pastry could be reformed through correct scoring. The hall shifted into a quieter expectancy. Exhibitors stepped back from their tables in studied nonchalance. Whispers turned to murmurs. The tea queue became solemn. When the judges reached the floral section, Mrs. Vine stopped before Agnes's arrangement and produced a cough that seemed to contain several clauses. "2 lilies," she said. Agnes smiled politely. There were 3. Mrs. Vine's eyebrows rose. "Oh?" "One has been removed." "Removed?" Mr. Havelock repeated. "Do you mean taken?" "I mean I cut 3 this morning, placed 3 in the box, closed it, and arrived with 2. Mr. Selby peered. "Is it possible you miscounted?" Agnes's smile thinned. "I taught arithmetic for 10 years. "No." The judges exchanged a look, half amusement, half professional shrug. Missing flowers were not in their rule book. They moved on after making notes. Agnes felt the air behind them relax and realized she had been holding her breath. At 11:20, someone found the lily. Or rather, someone found a lily. The discovery happened among the preserves because Mrs. Ivy Namble, who had entered quince jelly and liked to feel useful, was rummaging under the table for her handbag. She straightened, triumphant, holding a white lily by the stem. "Well now," she called, "what's this doing here?" People drifted over as if pulled by a current. The flower dangled unceremoniously, its petals bruised at the edge. Mrs. Namble pointed beneath the table. "Shoved behind the jars. I nearly sat on it." Agnes arrived with Mrs. Hetherington. She took the lily, not snatching it, but accepting it with the control of someone collecting evidence. "This is mine," she said. Mrs. Namble beamed. "Then it must have slipped out." It did not slip out. Agnes examined the stem. It was snapped near the base. Not cut. It was broken. The word changed the room. Broken had a moral heft. Missing did not. Mrs. Hetherington looked from the lily to the bright faces surrounding them. "All right, everyone," she said briskly. "Back to your entries. There'll be plenty of time to talk later." But there would not, she knew, be much else to talk about for the rest of the day. And in that shared excitement, something quieter took root, waiting for the police to notice. The lily, held at arm's length by Agnes Swain, seemed to accuse the room of a faintly embarrassing melodrama. It was still a lily, white, heavy with scent, faintly smug in its own perfection, but the snapped stem converted beauty into grievance. Agnes looked at it as if it were a pupil caught smoking behind the bicycle sheds. Disappointed, yes, but more perplexed than angry, as though the facts had wandered off the syllabus. Mrs. Hetherington, who had told everyone to go back to their entries, found that nobody in Flaxborough ever truly went back to anything once a story had presented itself. They drifted away slowly, like a tide pretending it was not curious. Mrs. Bell lingered by the jam fair enough to observe without seeming to do so. Miss Baxter adjusted her glasses twice. Councillor Brand discovered a sudden need to verify the press of bodies as if he were conducting crowd control for the Home Office. "I want to know who touched it," Agnes said quietly. "Now, Agnes," Mrs. Hetherington replied, "there's no proof anyone touched it. It might have, well, rolled about." "It did not roll about and snap itself cleanly," Agnes said. "Someone broke it, perhaps by clumsiness, perhaps otherwise. But it was in my box when I left home. It was not broken then. I'm not imagining that." "Of course not." Mrs. Hetherington said it promptly, because denying a head mistress was like denying gravity. "All right, let's take it step by step. Who saw you bring the box in?" "Only Gordon Ricks would have seen me unload it. I parked on the lane by the churchyard. He was coming the other way with crates." Mrs. Hetherington nodded. "And the box was shut? You're sure of that?" "Yes. I checked the clasp. I'm not in the habit of leaving valuable things loose." The word valuable was not meant as vanity. It was the vocabulary of a woman who had known school budgets. Mrs. Hetherington frowned at the lily, then at the tables. "So it was intact on the lane, intact when you carried it through the door, then you set it down, and later it's missing. Later still it's found under a table, broken, that about right?" Agnes inclined her head, accepting the summary as she might accept a pupil's correct answer. "Then," Mrs. Hetherington said, "someone must have opened the box while you weren't looking. Unless it fell out without opening, which feels unlikely." "It would be impossible," Agnes said. "The sides are high. The paper was layered. I packed as I always do." "Always?" Another word that, in her world, contained proof. Mrs. Hetherington looked around. "We'll ask Gordon what he saw, and we'll ask anyone who might have been near your table. The trouble is, half the town is near half the tables at any given moment. Still, we can try." Agnes kept the lily, not because she needed it for the arrangement now, but because it was hers to keep and because holding it prevented her hands from doing something more dramatic. She moved away, returning to her display with a calmness that was clearly fueled by discipline rather than peace. It had to be entered as is, she decided, To alter it now would both look desperate and feel wrong. She arranged the snapped lily beside the flowers, laying it almost ceremonially on the cloth. If the judges noticed, they noticed. If they did not, it was their own deficiency. Mrs. Hetherington went to find Gordon Rix. She did not have to hunt long. Gordon, sensing history, had stationed himself by the tea urns where he could observe and be observed. He was distributing cups with a zeal that allowed him to stay in the thick of things without appearing to listen. "Gordon," Mrs. Hetherington said, "have you a moment?" He wiped his hands against his apron as if she had summoned him to a tribunal. "Yes, Mrs. H. Course." "You saw Mrs. Swain come in?" "I did. She near clouted me with her box." He grinned, then sobered. "Sorry. Yes, I saw her come in." "Did the box look shut to you?" "Shut and all. She'd got it gripped like she was carrying a crown." "Did anyone speak to her on the way in? Anyone get close enough to fiddle with the clasp?" Gordon's brow furrowed, a sight that suggested he had never been asked to remember neutrally before. "Not as I noticed. There was a lot of people, though. Mrs. Vine was by the door already, moaning about the draft. Councillor Brand was hanging about, telling me the recycling bins were overflowing. But they didn't go near her. She went straight through to the flower tables." "And after that?" Gordon shrugged. "I went to unpack my crates." "So you didn't see anyone near her box before she opened it?" "Not. Well, I didn't see it, but I couldn't watch everything. Mrs. Lorna Hakes was walking past with her cake. She was on edge, you know. Might have brushed by. Have you heard anyone say they saw something odd?" Gordon's eyes flicked toward the preserves, then back. He lowered his voice. "There's a lot of chatter. Mrs. Bell says she saw Mr. Croft hovering. Mr. Croft says Mrs. Bell's eyesight's a menace. Someone else reckons it could have been kids playing about because there's kids everywhere. But I didn't hear a proper witness, if that's what you mean." "I do." Gordon hesitated, then said, "Well, I saw Mr. Denham come in early. He was helping his aunt set out her pies. He had a big coat on, even though it's warm. Looked like he was in a hurry." "Mr. Denham," Mrs. Hetherington repeated. "Young Percy Denham from the chemist's?" "The very same. He's the one who never smiles unless he's checking your change." "Why mention him?" Gordon offered the kind of shrug that said he knew it might be nothing but would be insulted if it was not treated as something. He was about that end of the hall, that's all. Mrs. Hetherington filed it away. In Flaxborough, a shrug could be a statement. "All right, thank you. Keep your ears open, but don't go stirring." "I wouldn't dream of it," Gordon said, which was regarded by everyone within 9 feet as a joke. Mrs. Hetherington returned toward the floral section. On the way, she passed Mr. Croft, who was leaning down to inspect a row of beans that belonged to someone else. His inspection had the air of a man seeking solace in straight lines. "Albert," she said, "did you see anyone near Agnes's box?" He straightened slowly. "No. I looked over when I heard her say it was missing. But before that, no. I was at my Dahlia's, where my presence is both expected and salutary. Mrs. Bell thinks you were hovering." Mrs. Bell was within earshot at that moment, pretending to be fascinated by lemon curd and failing. Mr. Croft did not look at her. "Mrs. Bell," he said, "thinks all sorts of things. She once thought I'd stolen her dahlias when they'd simply died. I hovered at my own display. I did not meddle with Miss Swain's lilies, even if I might have advised her on spacing if asked." Mrs. Hetherington studied him. He was prickly, but not sly. A man like Croft would steal a prize if you gave him a rule saying he could. He would not sneak under a table with a lily. Still, pride could move people into strange shapes. "Do you think someone has done it deliberately?" she asked. Mr. Croft's mustache shifted in contemplation. "If it were deliberate," he said, "it was a poor sort of sabotage. Breaking a stem and hiding it under jam jars. That's not cunning, that's temper." "Temper from whom?" Looked across the hall where Agnes stood motionless beside her arrangement. "From someone who dislikes being taught a lesson." She has that effect. Mrs. Hetherington could not disagree, but the words tasted uncharitable. By noon, the judges had finished their rounds. Ribbons were being prepared on the stage, and the very mild brass band from the Rotary Club began assembling itself in the corner with the resigned dignity of men who knew nobody truly wanted a band, but everyone would feel cheated without one. People gathered for results, buzzing in low key. The Lily affair had slipped into conversation the way smoke slips under doors. Even those who had not cared about flowers now cared about the missing one, because it had moved the show briefly into the territory of wrongdoing. Agnes stood stiffly in the second row, aware of glances. She did not look around. She had trained herself not to look around. When Mr. Havelock began announcing winners, the hall hushed. There were polite claps, a few gasps. Mrs. Namble won second for her quince jelly and looked as pleased as if she had been knighted. Mr. Croft took first for dahlias. He accepted the ribbon with a nod that implied he had predicted it in 1987. The teenagers served tea and rolled their eyes where adults could see the virtue. All was proceeding in the Flaxborough manner. Then Mr. Havelock paused with an unusual note in his voice and said, "Before we go on, the committee wishes it to be known that there has been some concern about a missing flower in the floral arrangement class. It has since been found, damaged. We are not making any accusations, but we ask exhibitors and visitors alike to be mindful of entries. This show is built on trust." The word trust, spoken aloud, was like pointing at a crack in wallpaper. You noticed it even if you wanted not to. There was a soft, collective shifting. People looked at one another and away again, each privately thinking they were not the sort who would do such a thing, and wondering which sort might. Agnes's face remained composed, but her pulse tightened. She had not wanted a public announcement. She had wanted an answer. Behind her, someone murmured, "Well, if that's how it is, you can't leave anything alone, can you?" She turned slightly, catching only a glimpse of a pale hand withdrawing and the back of a navy coat. Not enough to identify, but enough to suggest that the broken lily had already made enemies. Outside, the sun moved pleasantly over the churchyard. Inside, Flaxborough's sense of itself had acquired a small bruise, and nobody yet knew how far under the skin it went. The announcement, meant as a gentle reminder, landed like a hymn slightly out of tune. Flaxborough applauded quietly and consulted neighboring faces for meaning. The brass band, sensing a mood that did not ask for romance, played something brief and martial. Agnes Swain stayed for the remainder of the prizes. She clapped where clapping was. Dew smiled thinly at people who told her she had made a fine show of it anyway, and accepted tea from a girl who handled the cup as if passing contraband. All the while, her mind circled the snapped stem. She had spent a career believing mischief was rarely innocent. Mrs. Hetherington cornered her by the side door as the crowd began to dissolve into lunch plans. "I'm sorry about that little speech," she said. "Mr. Havelock meant well." "I understand committee manners," Agnes replied. "He meant to steady the atmosphere. I don't suppose he knows it's already wobbling." "Do you want me to ring the police?" "Properly, I mean." "It seems absurd." "Absurd things still happen." Agnes hesitated. She was aware of eyes on her even when none were nearby. A formal complaint would make her look ridiculous to half the town and vindicated to the other half. "I want to speak to a few people myself first," she said. Mrs. Hetherington raised her brows. "Agnes, you can interrogate pupils because you have authority. Here, you'll get gossip and sulks." "Then I shall be polite enough to receive both." She moved toward the tea tables where exhibitors clustered with sandwiches. Agnes began with Mrs. Bell, because Mrs. Bell was already offended on her behalf. "Mrs. Bell, you were at the door earlier. Did you see anyone touch my box?" Mrs. Bell lifted her chin, pleased by the official tone. "I didn't see anyone touch it, no. But Albert Croft was watching you like a hawk watches a hen house. I said so to Daisy. He'll tell you he was observing, of course." Watching is not the same as opening, Agnes said evenly. Mrs. Bell blinked as if verbs were of secondary importance. No, but it's the start, isn't it? Men like that resent anyone coming in and showing them up. Agnes thought of Albert Croft's formal pride and predictable irritations. He would resent, yes. He would not skulk with a lily. Still, she did not say so. Mrs. Bell's integrity depended on her suspicion. She thanked her and turned to Miss Baxter, who was buttering a scone with literary concentration. "You were near the flower tables at 10 o'clock?" "I was," Miss Baxter said. "Dahlias to the left, lilies to the right. I remember because I had just been thinking the dahlias looked like church vestments and the lilies like a headmistress." Agnes did not smile. "Did you see anyone near my box?" Miss Baxter paused, replaying the scene. "I saw who passed. Mrs. Hakes with her sponge. Mr. Denham carrying those pies of his aunt's. Councillor Brand loitering because he can't bear to be irrelevant. I didn't see anyone open anything, but there was a moment when everyone turned because Gordon dropped a crate by the door. Your box could have been meddled with then." "Meddled with by whom?" "By someone quick enough to do it in a breath and agitated enough to think it worth doing." She looked up over her glasses. "Do you have any agitated enemies, Mrs. Swain?" "Not as far as I know, but one is not always informed." Miss Baxter inclined her head, a small apology for the town at large. Agnes moved on, collecting impressions rather than answers. Councillor Brand protested at length that he had never touched a lily unless to hand one to his wife on anniversaries, which he admitted he sometimes forgot. Percy Denham, approached at his aunt's stall, was polite, pale, and faintly affronted that a chemist's assistant might be suspected of gardening misdemeanor. "I came in with Auntie May's pies," he said. "I set them down. I went to wash up in the little kitchen, then returned to help. I didn't go poking in boxes." "Did you see anyone else by mine?" "No." His tone implied a complete ignorance of other people's motions. "If someone did it, they did it while I was elsewhere." Agnes withdrew. Her inquiries had produced no culprit, only a widening ring of possible moments. Yet one detail held steady. Miss Baxter's mention of the dropped crate. A distraction, a turning of heads. It was a small thing, but small things were how quiet towns hid louder impulses. By 1:30 the show was emptying. Exhibitors folded cloths, lifted entries with care or resentment, and discussed the evening dance. Agnes packed her 2 good lilies and the broken one separately. She did not intend to take it home as a souvenir. She intended to keep it as a question. Outside the air was cool and bright. She walked toward her car in the churchyard lane, box balanced, head high. At the gate, she noticed Mrs. Vine and Councillor Brand standing by the wall. Their conversation stopped as though clipped. Mrs. Vine produced a cough that might have been a signal. Agnes nodded briskly and passed. She had gone 3 steps when a voice behind her said, too softly to be casual, "Careful what lessons you give, Mrs. Swain. Some folk don't sit still for them." She turned. The lane was briefly empty except for the retreating back of a man in a navy coat, already merging with the crowd toward Station Road. Agnes stood quite still, her grip tightening on the box. The remark was not direct enough to report, not loud enough for witnesses, not definite enough to confront. Yet it was deliberate cruelty, and deliberate cruelty, she knew, could grow. Across the yard, Mrs. Hetherington watched Agnes pause and felt a prickle of unaccountable worry. She had hoped the Lily affair would settle into anecdote by tea time. Instead, it seemed to be putting down new roots. Agnes drove home through lanes edged with hedges, aware of her irritation the way one is aware of a stone in a shoe. Not crippling, but impossible to forget. The flower box on the passenger seat gave off a faint perfume. With each bump, the snapped lily shifted in its wrapping, reminding her that something uninvited had entered her morning and refused to leave. At St. Crispin's the grounds were quiet. Term did not begin for a week, and the girls were away. Agnes carried the box into her cottage kitchen, set it on the table, unwrapped the good lilies, and put them in a jug. Only then did she lay the broken one on a tea towel, like a question that would not be answered by tidying. She made tea and, without admitting it, a list, not of suspects because Flaxborough was too full of people, but of motives. Some parents had disliked her reforms. Uniforms, Latin, the quiet war on lipstick. Some former pupils had carried grudges into adulthood. A few neighbors thought all headmistresses were born to meddle. None of it seemed large enough for theft, breakage, and a threat in the lane. The voice had been a man's, low and controlled. She could not place it. She could place the intent. It was meant to unsettle her and to suggest she had been interfering in someone else's private equilibrium. That implication made her more curious than frightened. At 3 o'clock the telephone rang. On ordinary days, Agnes let callers wait. Today she picked up at once. Agnes Swain. Agnes, it's Daisy Hetherington. Yes, Daisy. I've been thinking about that lily. I didn't want to mention something earlier, not with half the town listening. What is it? After you left, I went to stack the cloths. Near the preserves table, I found your box clasp open, wide open. I thought at first you'd forgotten to shut it, but you'd gone. Someone had opened it and left it that way. Agnes felt her stomach go very calm. Are you sure it was my box? I'm sure. I know the typed label, and I know you. You'd never leave it open. No. There were only a few people left by then. Mrs. Namble packing her jelly, Percy Denham helping his aunt, Councillor Brand and Mrs. Vine by the stage gossiping, Gordon hauling chairs, Albert Croft still fussing. That's about it. That's most of the hall. Yes, but not the crowd, not the blur, a smaller net. The open clasp meant the flower had not escaped itself. Someone had reached into a closed box after she set it down and before she opened it. Someone had either meant to spoil her entry or had been searching for something else and accepted the lily as collateral damage. The second possibility made her feel colder than the first. If the lily had been a distraction, what had been the target? I want this looked into, she said. I thought you might. I can ring Inspector Purbright. He's polite and he's got that way of listening as if he's letting you talk yourself into honesty. Agnes had met Purbright at school functions where he judged debates. He was compact, sandy-haired, with a mild voice that never pretended to authority, yet somehow carried it. She liked him. She disliked needing him. Do, she said. Please do. Right, I'll call the station. If he can't come today, he'll come tomorrow. I'll let you know. After the call, Agnes sat a long minute without moving. The tea cooled. She replayed the hall, the dropped crate, the turning heads, the quick hands that could slip a clasp and lift a flower in the same breath. She could not picture a face, only a habit, furtive, impatient, too sure of its own grievance. By 7 that evening, Inspector Purbright came to see Daisy Hetherington in her sitting room above the bakery. He arrived on foot through a light rain, took off his hat at the door and accepted tea without ceremony, as though he had meant to call anyway. I'm sorry to trouble you, Daisy began. Not at all. You sounded a trifle worried. Tell me what happened. She did, sparing no detail and offering no conclusions. Purbright listened with a face polite enough to be blank, but attentive enough to be dangerous. When she finished, he said, So the lily was missing, then found broken under the preserves table, and later you noticed the clasp open after Mrs. Swain had left. That's it. And someone spoke to her in the lane. Yes, a man in a navy coat. We don't know who. Purbright stirred his tea slowly. Flaxborough has a generous supply of navy coats. Did anyone else complain of missing entries? Anything else out of place? No. Did the person who found the lily say precisely where it was? Behind the jars, under the preserves table. Mrs. Namble found it looking for her bag. And that table is opposite the flowers. So someone carried a lily across the hall and hid it among glass, presumably unnoticed. Which makes me think it was done while people were distracted. What distracted them? Gordon dropped a crate. There was a clatter. Heads turned. Purbright nodded faintly. Little noises are useful. People forget what they did while they were looking. All right, I'll speak to Mrs. Swain in the morning and then call on one or two others. I don't imagine there's a murderer loose among the dahlias, but someone has had a fit of unpleasantness, and I should like to know why. And if it was just silly carelessness, then we'll find which variety of silliness it was. Carelessness has habits too. He finished his tea, thanked Daisy, and left her with the comfort of having passed the weight to someone who knew how to carry it. Outside, the rain fell more firmly, and the town, neat and secretive in its own way, went on preparing itself for a Saturday night. Inspector Purbright arrived at St. Crispin's a little after 9 the next morning, not because he believed in making an impression, but because he believed in not missing people before they left for the shops. The school sat on a rise above the river, red brick severe, its windows giving the impression of constant supervision even when empty. Purbright walked past the iron gates without hurry, nodded to the caretaker sweeping leaves from the drive, and was shown into the headmistress's cottage at the back. Agnes Swain met him in the doorway with the same upright composure she used for governors and nervous parents. She was not, he thought, a woman who invited chaos into her day. Chaos had to climb the wall. Inspector Purbright, thank you for coming. Good morning, Mrs. Swain. He removed his hat, as if the lily affair demanded ceremony. Mrs. Hetherington told me a little. I'd like to hear it from you if you don't mind. They sat at her kitchen table. Agnes poured coffee and set the broken lily, still wrapped in its tea towel, between them like a specimen in a lesson. I cut 3 lilies at 7:40, she said. I packed them myself. The box was closed. I carried it to the assembly rooms. I opened it there and found 2. The third was later, found broken under the preserves table. Mrs. Hetherington found my clasp open after I had left, and someone in the lane suggested I should be careful about giving lessons. Purbright listened as if each sentence were a bead to be slid onto a string later. You're quite sure you shut the box before you left home? Yes. And you're sure you didn't open it in the hall before setting it down? I went straight to the floral tables and put it there. I opened it once when I began arranging. Did you leave it unattended at any point between putting it down and opening it? Only for moments. I spoke to Mrs. Hetherington briefly. People passed. There was a clatter by the door. Heads turned. Ah, Purbright said softly. The crate. Agnes looked at him. Mrs. Hetherington mentioned that. It has been mentioned. He let the phrase sit without judgment. Do you recall who was nearest to your table at that moment? She frowned, replaying unwillingly. Mrs. Hakes with a sponge? Mr. Denham, Councillor Brand. Miss Baxter. I cannot swear in what order. You spoke to some of them afterwards? Yes. None saw anything? Purbright nodded. Often people don't notice a thing because they're busy not noticing others. Now, about the lily itself. He unfolded the tea towel and lifted the stem carefully. You said it was snapped. It was intact when I cut it. Someone must have pulled it. He examined the break. The snap was clean but not fresh. The fibers were slightly crushed, as if the stem had been bent sharply then pressed between other objects. He sniffed, not theatrically. Did you notice any bruising on the petals before it vanished? No. So the damage happened after it left your box? Yes. And it was hidden under preserves. Why do you think someone would do that? Agnes's eyes sharpened. Because they needed to put it somewhere quickly, or because they wanted it found in a humiliating place. Humiliation's a curious motive for a flower show. Purbright smiled faintly. Not impossible, though. This town does its humiliating quietly. Agnes did not smile back. Inspector, I don't care about ribbons. I care about being interfered with. If a person is prepared to take something from my box in public, What else are they prepared to do in private? That is exactly the question, he said kindly. Let's see who might feel interfered with by you. Has anyone been upset with you lately? Parents, staff, neighbors? Agnes thought. Her mind was an orderly cupboard. If resentment existed, it tended to be labeled. There have been arguments with a few parents over proposed curriculum changes. Nothing personal. There is a former teacher, Mr. Lathbury, who left last term in a huff. But he has gone to Lincoln, and there are always people who dislike authority on principle. I can't list them all. No, but you can list recent ones. Purbright waited. She sighed. Mrs. Fielding has been very unpleasant about our changes to sports provision. She thinks I'm turning girls into little clerks. Her husband is a counselor. They were at the show. And there is Mrs. Pargeter, 2 doors down from me, who resents the school bell because it disturbs her naps. She was also at the show. She entered crochet. Purbright tucked those names away without comment. All right, I'll speak to them, and to 1 or 2 others who were close to the flowers. If anything comes to you, a detail you thought too silly to mention, ring me. Silliness is often what matters. He stood, thanked her, and stepped back into the damp morning. The caretaker, still sweeping, looked up. Everything all right, Inspector? Perfectly, Purbright said. Have you ever heard of a man called Lathbury? The caretaker considered. Broom paused. Old Ted Lathbury used to teach here, left in a blaze, thought the girls should be doing more Latin, less netball. You're not after him, are you? I'm only after conversation. Purbright's voice made that sound like a small kindness. Did he attend the show yesterday? Not that I saw, though his sister, Mrs. Pargeter, did. She's everywhere. Purbright thanked him too and walked down toward the river, thinking about lilies and Latin. Back at the station he would read last year's show program, because patterns like to repeat. For now, he turned toward Pargeter's cottage first. If a sibling could leave in a huff, perhaps a sister could nurse one. He also noted, without yet knowing why, that Agnes had said 7:40 twice, as if nailing the minute to the table. People who repeat times are usually either truthful or rehearsed under pressure from their conscience. Purbright reached Mrs. Pargeter's cottage while the kettle was still deciding whether to boil. The house stood in a row of 3 near the school boundary, each with the same narrow garden and the same air of defiance against ivy. Mrs. Pargeter answered the door in a pinafore that suggested she expected either milkman or calamity. She was a small woman with a brisk nose and hair the color of a newly scoured saucepan. Inspector Purbright, I suppose you've come about that dreadful lily, she said. Come in, you'll want tea. Thank you, Purbright said, letting her lead him into a front room crowded with crochet cushions and photographs of grandchildren who looked slightly alarmed by affection. He sat where indicated. I did come about the lily, he said. Mrs. Swain was upset, and Mrs. Hetherington thought it best I ask a few questions. You were at the show yesterday. Of course I was. I had to take my sailing ships in wool down there. 1 second. Should have been first, but Mrs. Namble's niece is thick as thieves with Mrs. Vine. Purbright sipped the tea she thrust at him. You were near the floral tables at any point? Well, yes, I went past, only because I wanted to see whether Agnes had done her arrangement properly this year. She's always thinking she knows better than nature. Mrs. Pargeter sniffed. Not that I speak against her in public. Girls need strict. I had strict. Look at me. Did you see anyone open her flower box? No. I saw her come in all stiff-backed, like she was carrying the crown jewels. Then I went to the craft section. I'm not a flower person. She eyed him. You don't think I took it, do you? I don't think anything yet, he replied. If you had taken it, what would your reason have been? To teach her a lesson about leaving things about, maybe. But I didn't. I'm not a vandal. Have you any reason to wish her ill? Mrs. Pargeter gave a quick laugh. Because she keeps telling the council about the school bell and a parent's day traffic and that hedge that needs cutting, she's a nuisance. But wishing ill is different. She's my brother's enemy more than mine. Your brother is Mr. Lathbury? Yes. Ted. Put in 30 years there, and she pushed him out with her, modernizing. He says she's turning the place into a factory. I say he was past his sell-by date. Still, he didn't like it. Her voice softened. He left last term, and he's been sore since. Has he been back to Flaxborough recently? Not since he moved. He's in Lincoln. Doesn't like coming here now. Did he mention the show? Not a word. He wouldn't care about Lily's. If he'd wanted to spite her, he'd do something more educational. Purbright smiled. Did you hear anyone talking about Mrs. Swain before the show? Any grumbles that felt particular? I heard Mrs. Fielding in the co-op on Wednesday saying Agnes was out of control and someone ought to take her down a peg. She was with Mrs. Bell, that's all I know. Purbright thanked her, declined a second biscuit, and went 2 doors down to Mrs. Fielding's. The cottage was larger, with a climbing rose trained into obedience and a polished knocker that said respectable discontent. A voice called coming. When she opened the door, she wore a sports sweater and held a newspaper as if ready to quote it. Inspector Purbright, what can I do for you? May I come in for a minute? It's about yesterday's show. Her pleasantness flickered, but she stood aside. The sitting room was bright, the sort that would shame you for slouching. Purbright sat on the edge of a chair. Mrs. Swain's lily was taken from her box and later found broken. He said, I'm asking anyone who was near the floral section if they noticed anything. Mrs. Fielding's eyebrows went up. How extraordinary. I had no idea it was taken, only that it was missing. I can't imagine anyone doing such a spiteful thing. Were you near her box? I don't think so. I was by the cakes because my daughter entered shortbread. Then I went to the vegetables. I may have passed the flowers, but I didn't linger. Flowers aren't my line. You were heard to say in the co-op that Mrs. Swain needed taking down a peg. Mrs. Fielding blinked quickly. Well, one speaks loosely. She is difficult, but I didn't mean sabotage. I meant the governors should make her listen. She's making the girls do unnatural things. Less hockey, more accounting. What sort of English woman is that meant to produce? Purbright watched how she sped up once she began on principle, the way people did when private crossness found a public banner. You don't like her methods, he said. No, I do not. But I would never interfere with her property. I'm not a hooligan. Did you notice anyone who might be? She considered. The teenagers were running about, but they were serving tea. And Mr. Croft was hovering near the flowers, as he always does. If anyone could have done it without being seen, it would be him. He guards those dahlias like a prison warden. Purbright nodded as if she had named a cloud. Thank you, Mrs. Fielding. If you remember anything else, ring me. When he left, her smile returned a fraction too quickly. He walked back toward the town center. Resentment of Agnes Swain was plentiful. Actual vandalism required a narrower temperament. Still, he could not dismiss the notion that someone opened the box for a reason other than the lily. People who want to hurt do so with what is nearest to hand. The snapped stem had begun to feel less like an ending and more like a comma. He turned toward the chemist's next, wondering if quiet Percy Denham had seen more than his pale face admitted that morning. Purbright found Percy Denham in the chemist's back room, labeling bottles with a diligence that implied the labels might be examined by posterity. The shop itself was quiet. Monday mornings in Flaxborough produced only the occasional furtive purchaser of cough mixture and the steady stream of people who wished to describe symptoms rather than treat them. Percy was one of those still young enough to be assumed unwell by his elders and old enough to have stopped correcting them. He came out at Purbright's request, wiping his hands on a cloth already spotless. "Inspector," he said, polite to the point of stiffness, "is there something wrong?" "Nothing that a short talk won't help," Purbright replied. "May we sit here a moment?" They took chairs by the counter. Through the front window, Purbright could see Mrs. Bell cross the street with a loaf and the self-contained eagerness of a woman carrying potential news. "You were at the horticultural show on Saturday," Purbright said. "Yes, I was helping Aunt May with her pies." "She told me so. I'm asking again about Mrs. Swain's lily. I know you were asked on the day, but sometimes people notice more once they're not in the middle of things." Percy's gaze flicked down and back up. "I didn't see anyone take it. If I had, I'd have said. I don't doubt it. Still, take me through your morning there." Slowly. Percy prided himself on slow. He described arriving at 9:30 with his aunt, unloading pies at the preserve's end, washing up in the little kitchen, returning to the stall and going once to the tea urn. The narrative was neat, perhaps too neat. Purbright did not interrupt. When Percy finished, he said, "When you washed up, were you alone?" "Yes. Committee ladies were in and out, but I was the only one actually washing." "And could you see the hall from the kitchen?" "Sort of. The door has that little window." "Did you look through it?" Percy hesitated in a way that was not theatrical, merely human. "Once or twice. You can't help watching things when you've got your hands in suds." "What did you see?" "People milling, Gordon dropping a crate, everyone turning, Mrs. Swain by her flowers, Mr. Croft staring at his dahlias. That's all." "Did you see anyone at her box while heads were turned?" Percy shook his head quickly. "No, I'd have noticed." Purbright let the denial settle, then asked, "Did anyone go into the kitchen just after the clatter?" Percy frowned. "Not until later. Mrs. Namble came in for spoons around 10:15. Councillor Brand poked his head in about the taps." "At 10:15? "About that." Purbright nodded and did not follow the thread. The lack of follow-up made Percy uneasy. Uneasy people add where they might otherwise stop. "Inspector," Percy said after a moment, "is this really police business?" It was only a flower. It was only a flower until someone opened a closed box to remove it. That takes a decision. Decisions are my business. Percy absorbed that with a small swallow. Purbright watched his hands. Narrow, clean, with faint bite marks on the thumb. Not a violent man, but violence was not always done by violent men. Sometimes it was done by frightened ones who wanted to seem decisive. "He wasn't violent," Percy blurted. Purbright looked at him without surprise. "Who wasn't?" Percy flushed, startled to find his thought outside his mouth. "Sorry, I just mean, I don't think anyone meant to smash it. It might have happened by accident." "Accident caused by whom?" Percy pressed his lips together. "I don't know." "You said he." Percy's eyes darted toward the front shop where his aunt was serving a customer. He lowered his voice. "I don't want to get anyone into trouble for a silly thing. If it's silly, there won't be much trouble. If it isn't, we'll be better for knowing." Purbright's tone was as gentle as a hand on a shoulder. Percy stared at the countergrain. "All right, when the crate dropped and everyone turned, I did see someone near Mrs. Swain's table. A man in a dark coat. Navy, I think. I couldn't see his face because he was half behind her. He wasn't just passing. He leaned toward the box. I thought he was helping." "Did you see his hands?" "Only a bit. He lifted the lid slightly. Then he straightened quick when she turned back." "Did you lose sight of him?" "Yes. There was steam. When I looked again, he was gone." Purbright nodded slowly, as if confirming a quiet prediction. "You didn't mention this on Saturday." "I didn't realize it mattered, and I didn't want to accuse someone wrongly. I thought it was nothing. It may be, but it may not. Thank you for telling me now." Percy twisted his cloth. "Should I say who I think it was?" "Only if you're sure." Percy breathed in, then out. "I think it was Mr. Lathbury, Ted Lathbury, Mrs. Pargeter's brother. I'd recognize that stoop. He used to come in for his tablets. He wears navy like other men wear skin." Purbright kept his face neutral. You believed he was in Lincoln. So did I. That's why I kept quiet. But when I heard about the threat in the lane and you coming round now, I thought maybe I wasn't mistaken. Purbright stood, smoothing his coat. You've been very helpful, Mr. Denham. I won't trouble you further today. If anyone asks, you simply told me what you saw. Percy nodded, relieved yet worried in the same breath. Outside, Purbright let a cyclist clatter past and noted Mrs. Bell waiting in her doorway for anything to happen. The Denham glimpse stiffened the matter. Lathbury, navy coat, hand to box, then gone. He headed for Mrs. Pargeter's row to see if the ghost was real. If Lathbury had returned, someone had helped him keep quiet, and Purbright meant to learn whether that silence was loyalty or fear today. Purbright returned to Pargeter's row with the unhurried tread that suggested he had nowhere else to be. In truth, he had 3 places to be at once, but he had learned long ago that haste is what makes doors close. He paused a moment outside the hedge, looking at the 3 cottages as if they were a line of faces in a classroom. Curtains twitched in 2 of them. The middle one, Mrs. Pargeter's, was openly curious, the lace pulled half aside as if she had decided secrecy was for people with something to hide. She opened the door before he knocked. "Inspector, I was just saying to myself you'd be back." "Good morning again, Mrs. Pargeter. May I have another word?" "Come in." She led him to the same chair, the room still smelling faintly of wool and furniture polish. "You've found something, then?" "I've found a question. You told me yesterday your brother hasn't been back to Flaxborough." "He hasn't, not that I know of." "Why?" "Because someone saw a man in a navy coat leaning over Mrs. Swain's flower box during the clatter, and they believe it was your brother." Mrs. Pargeter's face shifted through several expressions in quick succession: disbelief, annoyance, a kind of defensive pride. "That boy, Percy Denham, thinks he knows everyone. Ted's in Lincoln. He rang me Thursday in a temper about his rent and the damp. He doesn't ring from Flaxborough." "Could he have come down on Saturday without telling you?" "Why would he? He hates these shows, all that mock rural cheer. Besides, if he came, I'd have seen him. I was there at 9 and stayed till 1. I was looking about half the time." Purbright accepted her certainty without endorsing it. "Do you have a spare key to his old place at the school?" "No," he handed it back. "I've only my own keys and the one for his post box because he forgets." "What are you implying, Inspector?" "Nothing yet. I'm trying to see where the truth might be hiding. Did anyone from Lincoln visit you this weekend?" Her eyes narrowed. "That's a sneaky way of asking if Ted was here." "I suppose it is." "Well, he wasn't, but my niece was. Sheila Lathbury. She works at the new estate office in Lincoln, so perhaps that's what you mean. She came Friday evening, stayed the night, left after lunch Saturday." "Did she attend the show?" "She did. She entered a Trebeck and lost to Mrs. Hakes. She was in a foul mood about it." "Do you know what she wore?" Mrs. Pargeter blinked. "Her clothes, I imagine. A beige coat, not navy, though her boyfriend's got a navy anorak, if that helps. But he didn't come." "Tell me about your niece," Purbright said. Mrs. Pargeter straightened. Family in Flaxborough was the one subject people spoke of with both pride and fear. "Sheila's a good girl, quick, likes things fair, has opinions about everything, which I suppose runs in the blood. She and Agnes never got on at school. Agnes called her restless. Ted called Agnes smug. That's the triangle, if you need it." Purbright nodded as though arranging pieces on a board. Sheila had reason to resent Mrs. Swain, then. Sheila resents anyone who looks down on her. She doesn't do spite, though. Not petty spite. Not petty. Mrs. Pargeter sniffed. If she wants to hurt someone, she does it properly. With a letter to the paper or a speech at a meeting. Not by pinching a lily. Purbright filed that too. "Did your niece mention Mrs. Swain on Friday?" "She said Agnes was still ruining the school with her precious reforms." Said she hoped someone would show her she wasn't Queen of Flaxborough. I told her to mind her tone in my house. She lives in Lincoln now, she should let go. Did she say how she hoped someone would show her? Mrs. Pargeter hesitated. Not exactly. She said, a small embarrassment would do her good. That's all. Thank you. Purbright rose. I'd like to speak to Sheila, if she's still in town. She's not. She went back to Lincoln, got a train at 2:30. Did you drive her to the station? No, she walked. She doesn't like owing lifts. Purbright thanked her and left. Outside, the air had warmed. The damp on the hedges glittered like good gossip. He walked toward Station Road, thinking about navy coats and beige ones, about people who did not do petty spite unless petty spite was all they could manage in the moment. The boy's sighting had given him one possible culprit, but Mrs. Pargeter's niece supplied another, with a more interesting motive. If Lathbury himself were in town, the act might be a rehearsal for something larger. If his niece were, it might be a flare of youthful temper dressed up as justice. At the station, he spoke briefly to the porter, who remembered everyone who carried luggage without remembering their names. No Mr. Lathbury had passed through on Saturday morning, the porter said, but a young woman in a beige coat had, with a tray wrapped in newspaper and a face like thunder. She had left on the 2:42 to Lincoln. The porter added, savoring it, that she had argued with the guard about a seat that ought to have been reserved for decent people. Purbright smiled as he thanked him. He could picture Sheila Lathbury now more clearly than he could her uncle. He turned back toward the town center, not yet ready to accuse, but ready to arrange a conversation. People who talk about small embarrassments are often capable of making them. Whether that embarrassment was meant to stop at a lily or to itch forward into worse mischief was the question that mattered, and he intended, politely, to ask it soon. For now, he let the town think it was only a flower, while he watched to see what else might break next quietly. Purbright did not ring Lincoln right away. That would have been efficient, and efficiency rarely improved honesty. Instead, he spent the afternoon in Flaxborough, letting the town's currents bring him to the right bank. He began at the estate office on Market Square, a shop front with photographs of bungalows in the window, and a bell that sounded as if it had been apologizing since 1912. A young clerk offered him a chair and tea in the same breath. Purbright declined both and asked gently whether Miss Sheila Lathbury might be expected back in Flaxborough soon. Miss Lathbury's in Lincoln, the clerk said. She only comes down on weekends, and not everyone. Is something wrong? Nothing that need trouble you, Purbright replied. She brought an entry to the horticultural show, I understand. A tray bake. The clerk smiled with office loyalty. She did. She was furious to get only third. Said the judging was cozy. Then she went back on the Saturday train. Did she say why she was in such a hurry? She had a viewing at 4 in Lincoln. Said she couldn't miss it. Mind you, she was still angry when she left, so I shouldn't be surprised if she just wanted away. Purbright thanked her and stepped back to the square where Saturday's bunting looked like a dream. He drifted to Green and Spindle's next, because Gordon Ricks was the kind of boy who remembered people in order to tell their stories later. Gordon was sweeping compost by the doorway with a theatrical sigh. He brightened when he saw Purbright, because nothing makes a market town feel alive like a policeman who looks as if he might ask something interesting. Afternoon, Inspector. Afternoon, Gordon. I'm following up your crate-dropping performance. Gordon reddened. I didn't mean to make a scene. That crate had a loose corner. I'm not complaining. I'm curious. Do you recall who was nearest Mrs. Swain's flowers when you dropped it? Gordon leaned on the broom, thinking hard. Well, lots of folk were turning round. But I remember Mr. Croft was by his dahlias, like always. Mrs. Hakes was walking past with her sponge. Percy Denham was sort of by the pies. Councillor Brand was hovering at the door. And there was that young woman, beige coat, Ted Lathbury's niece. I saw her because she was scowling at the cake table and nearly walked into Mrs. Swain. Nearly walked into her. Yeah. Agnes turned sharp and gave her that look she gives girls when they've got lipstick on. The niece muttered something under her breath. Then the crate went down and everyone looked away. When I looked back, the niece was at the flowers. She might have just been passing, mind. But she was there. Did you see her hands on the box? No, I didn't see any hands. I was trying to rescue the begonias from their death plunge. But she was close enough. Close enough can be a whole story. Thank you. He left Gordon imagining himself already part of the police file. At the station, Sergeant Lovejoy was wrestling with paperwork as if it were a personal insult. Lovejoy listened to Purbright's brief summary without much expression. "So we've got a Lily pinched by a disgruntled ex-pupil, perhaps?" Lovejoy said. "Should we send for her?" "Eventually. Not yet." "Why not?" "We could bring her in and ask straight." Purbright smiled. "If I ask straight, she can answer straight. If I let her return to her normal life first, she has to explain why she is bothered by a flower show in another town. People explain more when they think they are explaining themselves." Lovejoy did not entirely follow, but experience had taught him to trust Purbright's loops. Purbright spent the evening quietly at the Swan and Duck, where the roast beef was reliable and the talk more so. He listened to a barmaid repeat the Lily story with a new embellishment involving a mysterious stranger who had definitely not existed on Saturday. He listened to Mrs. Bell declare that these new girls from away have no respect. He listened to Albert Croft grumble that the committee should keep exhibits locked like in proper shows. He listened as the Lily story grew melodramatic in each retelling, but the center held. Someone had wanted Mrs. Swain uneasy. By 10, he had decided on a test, small and civil. The next morning, he would ring Lincoln after all, not to summon Sheila, but to invite her. He would phrase it so refusal would feel impolite and acceptance would feel safe. He would also ask Agnes Swain to be present, because guilt ripened in the light of the person it wished to humble. At home, Agnes slept poorly. The broken Lily lay in the scullery bin under coffee grounds. She had not thrown it away in anger. She had thrown it away because keeping it felt like keeping a threat. Yet the words in the lane stayed. She knew now, from Daisy's call, that there had been deliberate fingers on her box. Deliberate fingers meant deliberate mind. She found herself imagining former pupils in their adult disguises, imagining parents in respectable masks, imagining a navy coat shape slipping between tables while people looked away. She rose early, walked the empty corridors of St. Crispin's, and tried to recover her usual clarity. Around 8:30, the telephone rang. "Mrs. Swain? Purbright here. I wonder if you would join me at the station at 11. I have someone I'd like you to meet." "Meet?" Her voice was cautious. "Only a conversation about your lilies." For a moment, she wanted to refuse on principle. Then she remembered the voice. "Careful what lessons you give." "Very well," she said. 11. Purbright replaced the receiver and looked out over the yard, where leaves were dropping without malice. The case was still small, but small cases, he knew, were where bigger human truths hid. He hoped this one would remain no worse than spite wrapped in petals. He was not optimistic. At 10:30, Purbright had the small interview room warmed by a radiator that clanked like an elderly relative clearing its throat. He disliked rooms that felt like enquiries. People said less in them, so he put out 3 cups, a plate of plain biscuits, and left the doctor slightly ajar, a gesture of ordinary life. Agnes Swain arrived on the minute, coat buttoned, face neutral, the way she came to governors' meetings when she expected trouble but would not concede it. Sergeant Lovejoy hovered outside as a tribute to procedure and a warning to anyone inclined toward heroics. By 5 to 11, Purbright had made a call to Lincoln that began with, "I'm sorry to intrude," and ended with, "Perhaps you could help me clear a small matter up," which in Purbright's voice sounded less like a summons than an invitation to restore the universe to order. Sheila Lathbury came in just before 11, slightly breathless from a brisk walk from the bus stop, her beige coat damp at the shoulders. A man who had not met her would have put her at 25, the age when indignation is plentiful and experience not yet rationed. She had the same quick eyes Mrs. Pargeter had described, and the same air of expecting the world to keep up with her. "Inspector Purbright," she said, not offering her hand, but not refusing the idea either. "I got your message. You said it was about the show." "It is. Thank you for coming down." He indicated a chair. "Please sit. You know Mrs. Swain, I believe." Agnes gave the briefest possible nod. Sheila returned it with a smile that did not reach the upper half of her face. Purbright did not begin at once. He poured tea with the unhurried care of a vicar arranging communion, allowing the silence to settle and show what sort it was. Agnes waited, disciplined. Sheila looked at the biscuits, then at Agnes, then away again, as if everything in the room were testing her patience. "I won't keep you long," Purbright said at last. "A small incident happened on Saturday that has led to a larger unease. Mrs. Swain brought 3 lilies to the floral arrangement class. One was removed from her closed box before she opened it. It was later found under the preserves table with its stem snapped. Afterward, someone spoke to Mrs. Swain in the lane, suggesting she should be careful about giving lessons." Sheila's eyebrows rose slightly, as if admitting the story was, at least, a scandal of reasonable quality. Agnes's face did not move. "I've spoken to several people," he went on. "Most saw nothing. One person saw a woman in a beige coat near Mrs. Swain's box at the moment when people turned to a loud clatter. That clatter was caused by a crate dropped by Gordon Ricks. It gave whoever wanted privacy about 3 seconds. Sheila's body went very still. The teacup in her hands paused halfway to her mouth. Purbright watched that stillness kindly, as a doctor watches a pulse. "I'd like you to tell me, Miss Lathbury, what you recall of those 3 seconds." Her voice came out a shade higher than she meant it. "I recall turning to see what the noise was. Everyone did. I don't see how that makes me special." "It doesn't, except that you were close enough to the floral tables to be seen there immediately after. I passed the flowers. I was looking for the craft section. I wasn't skulking." "No one has said you were skulking." Sheila's jaw tightened. "Then why am I here?" "Because once the lily had been found broken, I asked myself why someone would take a flower, then hide it, then speak a warning. The warning was about lessons. That sounds like someone who feels taught against their will. Mrs. Swain is a teacher by profession. You were taught by her once." Agnes shifted almost imperceptibly, a change of breath more than posture. She did not interrupt. Sheila said, "This is ridiculous. Plenty of people were taught by her. Half the town. Does that mean we all go about snapping stems?" "No, but you did say something on Friday night to your aunt, Mrs. Pargeter, about hoping for a small embarrassment to do Mrs. Swain good." Sheila stared at him. "She told you that?" "She did." Purbright didn't soften it. "She was frank. She cares for your welfare, but she cares for truth too. She's always been a tattler." Sheila caught herself, swallowed. "I said it, yes. People talk. It doesn't mean anything. I was angry about the school. I'm still angry. Mrs. Swain pushed my uncle out." Agnes's eyes sharpened at that, but still she said nothing. She had learned, in staff meetings, that the person who speaks first loses some power. It was a habit Purbright noticed and approved of, because it gave other people space to reveal themselves. Purbright said gently, "Tell me about your uncle." Sheila's anger found its footing. "He gave the school 30 years. He cared about standards, Latin, literature, real education. Then Mrs. Swain arrived with her charts and committees and decided everything had to be modern. She humiliated him in front of staff. She made him feel like a relic. He went to Lincoln because he couldn't stand being treated like that." Agnes inhaled, a small, controlled breath. "Mr. Lathbury left because he refused to teach the syllabus the governors approved. He was not humiliated. He was corrected. Corrected, Sheila snapped. You called him old-fashioned and obstructive and told him he was damaging girls by refusing to change. He was a good teacher. And a poor colleague, Agnes replied evenly. He undermined staff, frightened the younger girls, and refused to take guidance. If you want to call that standards, you may. I call it stubbornness. Sheila's cheeks flushed. Her hands trembled slightly around the cup. You always did that. That tone, like you're saying something reasonable while making someone feel small. Purbright watched her with mild interest. The guilt in people rarely arrived as a confession. More often, it arrived as a complaint about tone. I'm sorry you felt small, Agnes said. It was almost sincere. It was not my objective. It remains not my objective. Isn't it? Sheila's laugh was short. You love teaching people lessons. Agnes opened her mouth, closed it. She was about to defend herself, Purbright could see. He raised a hand slightly, a polite pause. Miss Lathbury, he said, did you open Mrs. Swain's box? Sheila's eyes flashed. No. Did you touch it? No. Purbright nodded as if accepting a grammar exercise. Then help me understand something else. The lily was not simply taken. It was taken, carried to the preserves, hidden and snapped. That suggests not a tidy plan, but an impulsive moment. Someone reaches in, removes it, perhaps intending only to spoil the arrangement, then realizes they can't carry a white lily out of the hall without being seen. They hide it where their hands already are, near Aunt May's store, perhaps. Only after that do they discover the stem has snapped in their grip or in the crush of jars. Then they leave quickly, still angry, and later in the lane they say something meant to sting. That's what I imagine happened. It matches the evidence we have. Sheila stared at the tea in her cup. Agnes watched her with the impersonal focus she used on girls on the verge of crying, stern, but not without pity. Purbright did not push. He let the picture stand in the room as its own accusation. Finally, Sheila said, very quietly, You talk as if you were there. I often talk that way to see if someone else was. A long silence. In the hall outside, Sergeant Lovejoy coughed. The old radiator clanked again as if wishing it had not been involved. Sheila set her cup down carefully, as though it might explode if mishandled. I didn't mean to break it, she said. Agnes stiffened, not with triumph, but with the sharpness of someone who has found a splinter. Purbright's voice remained mild. Tell me what you meant. Sheila swallowed. I meant... She looked up, furious at herself for being in a police station and still afraid of being scolded. I meant to show her she can't just do what she likes without consequences. She stands there in town meetings telling everyone how the school should be, telling the council how the bell must be, telling people which hedges to chop. She never once thinks maybe she's wrong. Agnes's mouth tightened. I think about it constantly. Sheila flinched, then pushed on. You don't show it. You make everyone feel stupid. My uncle, my aunt, me at school. You acted like you were saving us from ourselves. I was trying to do my job, Agnes said quietly. Sometimes that requires firmness. Sheila's eyes filled suddenly, to her own annoyance. So I saw you at the show on Saturday with your perfect lilies and your clipboard face, and I thought a small embarrassment would do you good. Like I said, I was angry about losing third with the tray bake, and I was angry about Ted still being miserable. In Lincoln. I didn't plan it. Her hands made a quick, guilty gesture. When that crate fell and everyone turned, I lifted the lid a bit and pulled one lily out. I was going to drop it in the bin outside. I didn't know what else to do with it once I'd got it. Then people turned back, and I panicked. Aunt May's stall was right there with the jars. I shoved it under because I couldn't carry it past anyone. It snapped when I pushed it in. I didn't notice until later. Purbright said softly. And the remark in the lane? Sheila's face hardened again, a reflex against shame. I saw her leaving with her box, and I was still angry, so I said something. I regret that more than the lily, honestly. It was childish." Agnes looked at her for a long moment. "It was not the lily that unsettled me," she said. "It was the idea that someone felt entitled to reach into my belongings. That you did it because you were angry with me, angry with my manner, does not make it right. But I accept you have told the truth." Sheila stared, startled by the absence of melodrama. Purbright said, "We won't be treating this as a criminal charge unless Mrs. Swain wishes it. A broken flower does not require a court, but it has required honesty, and we have that now. I'm not going to pretend your actions were harmless. But I will say this. If you had wanted to do real harm, you would have chosen something less visible than a lily. The fact that you chose a lily suggests you were still hoping to be noticed and answered. You have been." Sheila wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Swain." Agnes nodded once. "I believe you are. I will also tell you something you may not wish to hear. Your uncle was not pushed out for being old-fashioned. He was pushed out for refusing to recognize that girls grow alongside the world. If he is unhappy in Lincoln, he might consider whether that unhappiness comes only from me. You may tell him I said that." Sheila's mouth twitched, caught between outrage and reluctant respect. "That's exactly the sort of thing you'd say." "Yes," Agnes replied, "and perhaps you will grow used to it." Purbright stood, indicating the conversation was ending before it became another war of principles. He walked Sheila to the door. She went without looking back, shoulders squared, like a pupil leaving a headmistress's office, determined to reframe the humiliation into a lesson for someone else later. When she had gone, Lovejoy wandered in. "Well then," he said, trying for neutrality and failing. "That was a tidy finish." "Not tidy," Purbright said. "Human." Agnes remained seated, hands folded as though waiting for a final bell. Purbright returned to her slowly. "I'm sorry to drag you into unpleasantness," he said. She looked down at her fingers. "Unpleasantness is part of the job in my line too, Inspector. I am glad to know it was not random." "No, not random." He hesitated, then added, "It may be worth remembering that firmness, even when necessary, creates heat. Heat does not excuse what she did, but it explains why she did it." Agnes considered that for a long moment. "I will remember it," she said finally. "Not to soften standards, but to soften the corners." Purbright nodded, quietly pleased. It was as close to an apology as either of them would make, and it was enough. By late afternoon, Flaxborough had already begun to file the Lily affair into its excellent cabinet of stories. A tale of youthful temper, a tale of vigilant policing, a tale of headmistress pride. There would be different versions, each with its own moral. Mrs. Bell would insist she had always suspected that Lincoln girl. Mrs. Pargeter would tell neighbors that Sheila had been misunderstood. Gordon Ricks would deliver a lively account to anyone willing to buy compost. People would shake their heads over tea and say, "Well, you never know what people are capable of, do you?" and feel both worried and reassured by the sentence. Agnes returned to St. Crispin's before dusk. She walked the grounds once more, watching the river move among reeds with the kind of patience she had never learned at school. In the flower beds by the cottage, her lilies still stood, thick-stemmed and slightly arrogant. She cut none of them that day. She only loosened the soil a little, then went indoors to her paperwork, calmer than she had been since Saturday morning. Purbright went back to the station, wrote a short report, and filed it under miscellaneous with a sense of mild satisfaction. He did not enjoy cases, but he enjoyed people telling the truth to themselves. That happened rarely enough to be worth noticing. Outside his window, Flaxborough resumed its routines. The market packed up. The buses came when ready. The river contemplated its destination. And somewhere in Lincoln, a young woman in a beige coat sat on a train, thinking about lilies, about teachers, about how easy it was to make a small embarrassment and how much harder it was to live with the echo of it.